There is a moment, somewhere in your 20s or 30s, when you realize the rules you were taught don't work. You were told to work hard, stay honest, show your value, and the right people would notice. You did all of it. You stayed late. You were transparent. You made yourself available. And you looked up one day and saw that the people ahead of you, the ones with the money, the access, the options, were not playing the same game you were. They were playing a different game entirely. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513. He was not writing philosophy. He was writing instructions. The Medici family had just exiled him. He'd seen power collapse up close. And what he documented, with ruthless clarity, was not how power should work, but how it actually does. 500 years later, the same three games are still running. The board has changed. The rules haven't. If you do not know these games, you are already losing them. In 1997, a young venture capitalist named Michael Moritz wrote a check to a company called Google. The founders were graduate students. The product didn't exist yet. Most of Silicon Valley passed. Moritz did not. When journalists later asked how he saw something others missed, he gave an answer that sounded modest. We just paid attention. But that answer contained a game most people never decode. Moritz didn't have better intelligence. He had structured intelligence. He had built a system, a network of researchers, academics, engineers, who fed him signals from inside universities before ideas ever reached public markets. By the time something looked valuable to the crowd, it had already been priced in. This is Game 1, Information Asymmetry. The game is not about knowing more. It is about knowing earlier than the person across the table, and never revealing the gap. How it works. Machiavelli understood that knowledge is not neutral. He wrote that a prince must learn to read the weather before the storm, not during it. Translated into modern terms, the person who sees the shift in conditions before others holds a structural advantage that cannot be overcome by effort alone. You can outwork someone with equal information. You cannot outwork someone with better information. The game is decided before the meeting begins. The rich don't consume public information first. Public information is already priced. By the time an article appears, a trend surfaces on social media, or an analyst publishes a report, the window has closed. What they consume instead are primary signals, direct conversations, industry relationships, the private dinner where someone mentions a supply chain shift before the earnings call, the conference sidebar where a regulator hints at policy direction. This is not luck. It is architecture. They build networks not for connection, but for signal flow. Every relationship is, in part, an information node. The lawyer who specializes in tech M&A. The academic who consults for defense contractors. The retired executive who still gets calls from their old board. Each node feeds data that is invisible to the market. When the data converges, they act quietly, without announcement, before attention arrives. The trap you fall into. Most people consume information publicly. News cycles, podcasts, trending topics. This is not information. It is entertainment wearing the costume of education. By the time something is discussed loudly, the game has moved. Worse, public information creates false confidence. You read the same report as everyone else. You conclude the same things. You act at the same time. And you wonder why results are average. They are average because you are competing inside the same information pool as everyone else, with no edge. Machiavelli identified a specific failure pattern he called the error of the imitative man. The man who studies what others have done and repeats it, believing repetition is strategy. What he does not understand is that the advantage was never in the action itself. It was in timing. And timing is a function of information. The first shift is to stop consuming public information as a primary source and start building private ones. This does not require wealth. It requires positioning. Find the people who work inside the systems you want to understand. Not the people who write about those systems, but the people operating inside them. The mid-level manager at a company you want to work with. The researcher 3 years ahead of the published literature. The operator in the market before the market has a name. These people exist everywhere. Most of them will talk to anyone who treats their knowledge with genuine respect. When Machiavelli was exiled from Florence, he spent his nights reading the Roman historians. Not the popular ones, but the primary sources. He wasn't looking for inspiration. He was reverse engineering decisions made by people who had already faced the conditions he was now facing. He built his own private information network from the dead. The point is not the source. The point is that the information arrives before the crowd. The second shift is to treat what you know as a resource that compounds. Information shared widely loses value immediately. Information held quietly, while position is built, retains value until the position is secured. The wealthy do not announce their next move. They execute it, and then, sometimes, they explain it after the advantage is already locked. Silence here is not secrecy. It is conservation. The person who tells you what they're about to do has already given away part of what makes the move work. The person who acts first and explains later has already won. You do not need to be inside elite circles to run this game. You need to be inside the right circles, even one level ahead of where information becomes public. That gap, even small, is the entire game. The compounding edge. There is a second layer to this game that most people never reach. Information asymmetry does not just create single advantages, it creates compound advantages. When you act on information before the market knows it, you establish a position. That position generates returns. Those returns fund access to better information networks. The better network generates better signals. The better signals generate better positions. Each cycle widens the gap. By the third or fourth cycle, you are not competing with the crowd on a level field. You are operating inside a different system. This is why wealth compounds at the top in ways it cannot at the bottom. It is not simply that the rich have more money to invest. It is that they have access to better information at every stage of every decision. They are not making better guesses. They are making decisions with fundamentally different data sets. The structural advantage is invisible from the outside, which is exactly what makes it so durable. Machiavelli described this as virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but the capacity to read conditions accurately and act at the precise moment the condition permits. The man with virtù does not react to the battlefield. He has already seen how it will develop and placed himself accordingly. Information asymmetry is the mechanism through which virtù becomes practical rather than philosophical. The people who understand this stop trying to predict outcomes and start engineering information flows. They ask not, what will happen, but who will know first, and how can I be in that room? The answer to the second question makes the first question irrelevant. Game 2. In the early 1990s, a small Belgian company called InBev controlled 30% of the European beer market. In 2008, They purchased Anheuser-Busch, the maker of Budweiser, for $52 billion. The deal shocked analysts. Budweiser was American culture. It sponsored the Super Bowl. It was, to most people, untouchable. InBev paid $52 billion and absorbed the debt without blinking. Why? Because they had spent a decade acquiring distribution infrastructure. The trucks, the contracts, the cold chain logistics that every brewer in their markets depended on. By the time they moved on Anheuser-Busch, they didn't just have money. They had leverage that made the deal structurally inevitable. Refusing InBev would have meant being cut from distribution networks across 3 continents. They hadn't just bought a beer company. They had become necessary to the industry. And necessity is the most powerful form of leverage that exists. This is Game 2. The Necessity Trap, How It Works. Machiavelli wrote, "The wise prince must rely on what is in his own power, not on what is in the power of others." He was warning against dependence, but his followers understood the inverse. Make others dependent, and you control the board without ever needing to threaten anyone. The necessity trap works through infrastructure, not superiority. It is not about being the best at something. It is about becoming the thing others cannot operate without. These are not the same game. Being the best at something makes you valuable. Being necessary makes you irreplaceable. Valuable things can be replaced by other valuable things. Irreplaceable things cannot be removed without consequence to the person doing the removing. This is why the richest families in history did not build famous products. They built banks, ports, railroads, and water systems. They built the infrastructure through which other people's ambitions had to pass. The Rothschilds didn't just lend money. They became the communication network between governments, the entity through which European powers coordinated debt during wartime. Refusing the Rothschilds meant operating blind. Necessity was structural. Modern versions of this game run everywhere. Amazon did not win by having the best products. It won by building the warehouse, payment, and delivery infrastructure that millions of businesses depend on. The moment a merchant migrates to Amazon's platform, they feed Amazon data about their customers, their best sellers, their margins. Amazon uses that data to identify their most profitable categories, and then launches competing products at lower prices. The merchant built Amazon's intelligence network. Amazon converted that intelligence into displacement. This is not a conspiracy. It is the necessity trap operating at scale. The platform becomes the infrastructure. The infrastructure becomes the leverage. The leverage becomes control. The trap you fall into. Most people build skills. Skills are valuable, but skills compete with other skills. Someone with a better skill, a lower price, or a more persuasive pitch can replace you. This creates permanent insecurity. No matter how good you become, the threat of substitution never disappears. And the deeper trap is, building skills makes you more dependent on whoever is hiring them. You need clients, you need platforms, you need markets that value what you do. Each of these is a dependency, and each dependency is a point where leverage sits in someone else's hands. Machiavelli called this the error of the mercenary, the man who is excellent at war but fights only for whoever pays him. When payment stops, so does his loyalty. And because everyone knows this, no one trusts him with the things that truly matter. He is useful, he is not necessary. The shift from valuable to necessary requires one deliberate act. Position yourself inside a flow, not at its edge. A flow is any system through which resources, decisions, or dependencies move. Money flows, information flows, supply chains flow, talent flows. The person at the edge of a flow provides a service. The person at the center of a flow controls passage. Control of passage does not require ownership of everything. It requires ownership of a choke point. Choke points are where flows narrow, where capacity is limited, where alternatives are few. A lawyer who specializes in one specific regulatory niche that every company in an industry must navigate is not one of many lawyers. They are a choke point. A supplier who provides a rare component without which a complex product cannot be assembled is a choke point. A platform that holds the relationship between a creator and their audience is a choke point, which is exactly why YouTube, Spotify, and Apple hold the leverage they do, not the creators. The question to ask is not, how do I become better at what I do? The question is, where is the choke point in the system I operate in? And how do I get there? Machiavelli's instruction was blunt. The prince who relies entirely on fortune is lost when it changes. Fortune is everything outside your control. The choke point is everything inside it. Build toward the choke point. Everything else is exposure. Once you are necessary, the game changes permanently. You no longer compete. You set conditions. The person who needs to pass through you does not negotiate with you from strength. They negotiate from constraint. And constraint, when the other party understands it, is the most civilized form of power there is. No threats required, no confrontation, just structure, the hidden cost of not playing. There is something else Machiavelli observed that is rarely discussed. The person who refuses to play the necessity game does not avoid the game. They become a piece in someone else's version of it. Every person who is excellent but replaceable is inside the necessity trap, on the wrong side. They are the flow that someone else controls. Their income passes through someone else's infrastructure. Their access to markets passes through platforms they don't own. Their professional fate is governed by conditions set by whoever holds the choke point above them. This is not a failure of effort or talent. It is a failure of positioning. The person who built skill but not structure has built a machine that generates income for the person who owns the pipe through which that income travels. Machiavelli's warning applies here with full force. The mercenary is used until he is no longer needed, then discarded without ceremony. Not because of cruelty, because the structure makes it rational. The shift is not dramatic. It does not require starting over. It requires asking once, with full seriousness, in the system I am currently inside, where is the choke point, and what would it take to own 1 inch of it? 1 inch of a choke point is worth more than miles of excellent peripheral work. Game 3. The Perception Management Game. In the winter of 1494, the French king Charles VIII marched 25,000 soldiers into Italy. City after city surrendered without a battle, not because they lacked walls or soldiers, but because the stories about Charles's army had traveled ahead of the army itself. Prisoners reported cannons that could destroy walls in hours. Ambassadors described an unstoppable force. By the time Charles reached each gate, the decision had already been made inside the city, not on the battlefield, but in the minds of its rulers. Machiavelli watched this campaign from Florence. He watched a king take a peninsula not through superior force, but through the strategic management of reputation. Charles didn't win Italy. He convinced Italy to surrender before the fighting started. 40 years later, Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." This is not cynicism. This is physics. Perception precedes reality in every human transaction. And the person who understands this, who manages perception deliberately rather than allowing it to form by default, is playing the third game. How it works. Perception management is not deception. It is the deliberate construction of the version of reality that other people use to make decisions about you. Every person forms a model of you in their mind. That model is built from fragments: how you dress, what you say, what you don't say, who you're seen with, what problems you solve, and what you're known for solving. Most people allow this model to form passively. They show up, they do work, and they assume the model that forms will be accurate. This is the expensive mistake. The model that forms passively is based on incomplete information, filtered through bias, and shaped by whoever is loudest in the room. The model that forms deliberately is engineered. Warren Buffett is one of the most sophisticated perception managers alive. He built the persona of the Oracle of Omaha, the plain-speaking, folksy investor, eating hamburgers in Nebraska while Wall Street chases complexity. This persona is real, but it is also constructed. It obscures the fact that Berkshire Hathaway operates one of the most complex tax optimization structures in corporate history. It deflects regulatory attention. It creates loyalty from retail investors who feel they are seeing a simple, honest man. The simplicity is the strategy. This is not fraud. The hamburgers are real. But the story has been managed so effectively that most people form a model of Buffett that protects him from scrutiny while positioning him as trustworthy. Both outcomes serve his interests. Machiavelli's instruction was precise. It is not necessary for a prince to have all the virtues, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. This is not a call to hypocrisy. It is an observation about how decisions are made. People act on their models of reality, not on reality itself. The person who understands this controls the inputs to that model. The trap you fall into. Most people believe outcomes should speak for themselves. Work hard enough, produce good enough results, and recognition will arrive. This belief produces people who are genuinely excellent and completely invisible. Or worse, genuinely excellent and credited to someone else. The trap is deeper than credit. When you do not manage your own perception, others manage it for you. And the model they build is shaped by their interests, not yours. Competitors position you as limited. Mediocre colleagues claim your work. Environments that misunderstand you become environments that undervalue you. Machiavelli watched this happen to brilliant men in Florence. Capable administrators left behind because they had allowed the wrong story to attach itself to their name. The story was not their fault. Their failure to manage it was. There's also a subtler trap. Overperformance. The person who solves every problem visibly, who rescues every situation publicly, trains others to see them as a utility. Always available, always useful, never scarce. Scarcity is the foundation of perceived value. The more available you are, the less valuable each instance of your availability becomes. Perception management operates on 3 levers: association, scarcity, and frame. Association is the company you keep and the problems you're known for solving. People form models of you based on your context. The consultant who works with struggling companies is a fixer. The consultant who works with category leaders is a strategist. The work may be identical. The positioning determines how the model forms. Deliberately, choose the associations that build the model you need. Scarcity is controlled availability. This is not rudeness. It is the understanding that presence without selectivity destroys value. The investor who meets with anyone is less important than the investor who is difficult to access. The executive who responds to every email within minutes signals that their time has no price. The person who responds selectively signals that their time must be earned. Scarcity creates the gravitational pull that urgency cannot. Frame is the most powerful lever. The frame is the story that precedes your arrival. Every significant interaction begins with a frame already in place. The question is whether you set it or someone else does. Before a negotiation, before a job interview, before a partnership discussion. The frame is already active. The person who set it holds the advantage. Machiavelli managed his own frame with extraordinary precision. When he was exiled from political life, he did not appeal for sympathy. He wrote. He produced The Prince, the discourses, the art of war. He positioned himself not as the fallen administrator, but as the essential theorist, the man whose ideas every ruler needed. When he was eventually rehabilitated, it was not because the Medicis forgave him. It was because he had become too intellectually useful to ignore. He managed his frame in exile until his frame became his leverage. This is the final instruction of the third game. Manage the story before the story manages you. Not through manipulation, but through deliberate construction. Choose what you are known for. Choose what you are associated with. Choose when you appear and when you don't. Every choice shapes the model. Every model shapes the decision the person across the table makes about you. The outcome of that decision, whether it's a deal, a promotion, a partnership, or a check, was determined before they ever saw your work. The compounding effect of managed perception. There is a dimension to this game that most people dismiss as unfair until they understand the mechanics. Perception, once set, is self-reinforcing. The person who is seen as a strategic thinker receives opportunities that require strategic thinking, which generates evidence of strategic thinking, which reinforces the perception. The person who is seen as operational receives operational tasks, which produce operational results, which confirm the perception. Both people may have identical raw capability. The trajectory diverges based entirely on the initial frame. This is not bias in the pejorative sense, though bias can amplify it. It is a basic feature of how human cognition processes information. People do not evaluate you from scratch on each interaction. They update a prior. The prior was set by the frame. The frame was set by whoever controlled the story first. The rich understand this at a structural level. This is why they invest in public relations not as a vanity exercise, but as a defensive architecture. The legal battles you never heard about were preempted by perception management that made those battles too costly to initiate. The regulatory scrutiny that never materialized was deflected by a reputation built before the regulator turned their attention toward the industry. Perception management at scale is invisible because when it works, nothing appears to happen. The threat never arrives. The competitor never attacks. The regulator never calls. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it is the most deliberate investment being made. Machiavelli's final piece of instruction on this was not subtle. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But the game has evolved. In the modern world, the most sophisticated version of this principle is not fear and not love. It is indispensability wrapped in trust. The person who is trusted and necessary has built a position that is almost impossible to attack, because attacking them carries costs that no rational actor can justify. That combination, trusted and necessary, with a carefully managed frame, is the complete architecture of durable power. 3 games, 1 architecture. Information asymmetry, knowing earlier, acting quietly, and never revealing the gap. The necessity trap, moving from valuable to indispensable by controlling the choke point, not just the craft. And perception management, engineering the model others use to make decisions about you before they ever reach the table. These are not tactics for the unethical. They are the mechanics of how power has always moved. Machiavelli did not invent them. He described them, precisely because the people who refused to understand them kept losing to the people who did. Notice what these 3 games have in common. None of them are won by working harder. They are won by operating at a layer most people never look at. The hard worker competes on output. The person playing these games competes on position. Position determines what your output is worth, where it goes, and who gets to decide what happens to it. Position is upstream of effort. This is why effort without positioning produces excellent results that belong to someone else. The people who run these games are not monsters. Most of them are not even aware they are playing. The games were taught to them implicitly, by parents who controlled information inside their household, by mentors who showed them which room to be in, by environments that modeled perception management as a normal part of professional life. They absorbed the architecture early and built on it without needing to name it. The people who do not run these games were not taught the architecture. They were taught the work ethic. Work harder, be honest, show your value. These things are not wrong, but they are inputs to a game. And if you don't know the game, you cannot control what happens to your inputs. Understanding the games changes what you do with what you already have. The student who now knows about information asymmetry starts asking different questions, not just, what should I learn? But who knows this first, and how do I get close to that person? The professional who understands the necessity trap stops asking, how do I get better? And starts asking, where is the choke point, and what would it cost to own part of it? The entrepreneur who grasps perception management stops asking, how do I get recognized for what I do? And starts asking, what is the story that precedes my arrival, and who set it? These are not complex shifts. They are directional ones, same amount of effort, completely different targets. Machiavelli's final instruction in The Prince was not about strategy. It was about clear sight. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, and those few dare not oppose the opinion of the many. The many will keep playing the game they were taught. They will work hard on the surface of systems designed to extract the maximum from that work while returning the minimum. You now know there is another game. The question is whether you play it, or whether you spend the rest of your career being played. Like this video. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.